Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Flexbox container and its attributes. Okay, so here's our setup scene. We have an H1, a div, and then within that div are three smaller divs. It's linked to a style sheet. The style sheet has a reset of no margins, no padding, and box sizing to border box. And then we're styling our container with an absolute size of 300 pixels wide by 300 pixels tall and a border so we can kind of see what's happening. And then our items, item classes, are given a background color and a border so we can see what's happening. And they are set to an absolute width of 70 pixels and height of 70 pixels. Okay, here we go. So to enable Flexbox on the container, we use display flex. And what that's done is it's kind of made our elements here act like inline blocks. So Flexbox, the first thing to understand about Flexbox is that it will lay out, when enabling Flexbox on a container, it's going to lay out interior elements based on two axes. So by default, the main axis is the rows, and the secondary axis is the columns. I can show you this with flex direction. So by default, it's set to row, which doesn't do anything, but I could set it to column, and now this becomes the main axis, and this becomes the cross axis. I could also do row reverse, and now the main axis is going this way, and the cross axis is going that way. But it would, it's basically, for this attribute, it would be, you'd leave it alone, because that would be the default, or you'd go to column. Okay, so the next thing, now that we know main axis, cross axis, is how do we align items along that main axis? And that's the next group of things we'll talk about. And the parameter that controls that is justify content. So for this one, the default is start, which doesn't do anything. But if we do end, it goes to the other side. If we do center, it aligns it to the center, which is really handy. There's also space between, which pushes the first item to one side, the second item to the other side, and then equally distributes the space in the middle. If I comment this out here, this is a really handy one for setting up something like a navigation. There's also space around, which distributes the space on either side as well. So that's a really kind of powerful means already to justify content within a parent container. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is how to justify content along the cross axis. So if I do align items, by default, it's set to stretch. Now, we don't see anything here when we do stretch because we've given it a height, but if I turn that off, content will automatically expand to the height of the parent container. If I do start, it will collapse around its interior content and go to the start. And then end is end, center, baseline. So if I do baseline, At the moment, that looks a lot like start, but what I can do is, let's say this one, I'm going to add a class. Item 2. And we'll let this one font size something big. That's too big. How about 30? Okay. So if I say, yes, to base, so if I say start, the block goes to the top, but if I do baseline, it will align to the baseline of the items, which can be really handy for aligning up your typography. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is wraps. So if I bring the height back here, I'm going to add a bunch more of these. I broke it here. Okay. I'll grab these. Make a bunch more. And you see what's happening here is they're trying to squeeze together, and there's going to come a point where they can't shrink anymore based on the content of the boxes. So in that scenario, we have flex wrap. So the default is no wrap, which does nothing. But if we do wrap, the items will pop back down to the next line, which is pretty great. Now, when we do that, that unlocks another property. So like, how do we want items to behave after they wrap around? And that's align content. Then we can do center. So align content is basically how you deal with the wrap. And you can kind of see the difference here. If I turn this off, this is the behavior. But if I turn this back on, we have center. End. Start. Stretch, which I bet if I turn that off. Okay. And that is actually the basics of the container of Flexbox. In the next video, we're going to look at how we alter individual items and unlock some more control.